that night has haunted her for years. Whispers, rumors, endless questions, all circling around one single moment that no one ever fully understood. For so long, Demet Özdemir stayed silent. She avoided the questions, smiled through the gossip, and moved forward with her career. But silence has a way of turning into pressure, and recently, she decided that the time had come to speak. To finally reveal what really happened in that hotel room. And when she did, the world was not ready for what she said. It started like any other evening during a hectic filming schedule. The cast and crew had been working long hours, emotions were running high, and everyone needed a break. They had wrapped late that night, and a small group decided to have dinner at the hotel where they were all staying. It was meant to be casual, laughter, food, maybe a drink or two. But something about that night changed everything. Demet, in her interview, described it with calm precision. "People think they know the story," she said softly, "but they only saw what the cameras wanted them to see. The truth was much more human." She explained that the evening started peacefully. She and Yaman, who had been the subject of endless speculation about their relationship, were both there. They were seated across from each other, surrounded by colleagues and friends. For a while, it felt normal, like old times, like nothing had ever gone wrong. But then, as the night went on, things began to shift. "Sometimes," she said, "you can feel when something in the air changes. It's not about words, it's about everything that isn't being said." The energy between them was tense, fragile. They hadn't spoken properly in months. The unresolved emotions, the pain, the misunderstanding, all of it lingered in the silence between them. And then came the moment that would later become the center of every rumor. When the dinner ended, most of the team went to their rooms. But Demet and Can stayed behind for a few minutes. According to her, it wasn't planned. It just happened. "We were both leaving, and we stopped by the elevator," she recalled. "He looked at me, and it was like time froze. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say, but I couldn't." The elevator doors opened, and they both stepped inside, just the two of them. The doors closed, and that's when the real story began. For years, tabloids filled in the blanks. Some claimed they argued. Others said they reconciled. A few even invented wild stories about what might have happened behind those doors. But Demet, for the first time, set the record straight. "We didn't argue," she said. "We didn't confess anything. We just stood there." It was only a few seconds, but to her, it felt like forever. "He looked at me, and I could see everything we had been through in his eyes, the beginning, the chaos, the distance. And for the first time, I realized that we weren't angry anymore. We were just sad." When the elevator reached the top floor, they didn't go to their separate rooms immediately. Ken asked if they could talk for a moment. Not in public, not in the hallway, but somewhere quiet, away from the noise. And so, they went into the private lounge area next to the hotel suites. That's the moment that later became distorted into the hotel room story. Demet smiled sadly as she recounted it. "We sat down. I remember there was this small lamp in the corner. It was so quiet you could hear the city through the windows. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Ken said something that caught her completely off guard. He said, 'I don't hate you. I never did.' Those words, simple as they were, changed everything. Because behind the rumors and the pressure of fame, there was still something real, something fragile that had never completely disappeared. I didn't know what to say," she said. "I think I just nodded, because if I had spoken, I would have cried." They talked for nearly an hour, about the misunderstandings, about how fame had pulled them apart, about how people's opinions had turned something beautiful into something painful. She said, "It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no tears, no shouting. It was two people finally saying goodbye to what they used to be." When the conversation ended, Ken stood up first. He smiled faintly, thanked her for listening, and walked toward the door. But before he left, he turned and said something that would stay with her forever. "If I ever disappear from your story, don't think it's because I stopped caring. Sometimes, leaving is the only way to protect what's left. And then, he left. That was the last real conversation they had before everything changed, before the world turned their private closure into a spectacle. The next morning, paparazzi spotted Kim leaving the hotel early, and by noon, rumors exploded online. Something happened between them, the headlines screamed. But no one knew that what had happened wasn't a scandal, it was peace. It was closure. For years, Demet carried that night silently. She let people believe what they wanted, because in her heart, she knew the truth was something too intimate to explain. But as time went on, the misunderstanding grew bigger than the reality. So when she finally chose to speak about it now, it wasn't to defend herself, it was to free herself. I stayed quiet, she said, because sometimes the truth belongs only to the people who lived it. But I've realized that silence can also turn into a prison. That night was not a secret. It was just a goodbye. The interviewer asked her if she missed him. She paused for a long time before answering. I miss the simplicity of who we were before everything got complicated. But no, I don't miss the pain. I think we both had to lose each other to grow. Her words spread across social media like wildfire. Fans were divided, some heartbroken, others relieved. Many said it was the most honest thing she had ever said. Because for once, it wasn't about headlines or careers. It was about humanity. About two people who had loved, lost, and learned to move on without bitterness. Even Ken himself seemed to react in silence. A day after the interview aired, he posted a single black and white photo, a view of the sea, waves crashing against rocks, and the caption, "Some stories don't end. They just rest in silence." Fans immediately connected it to her confession. Was it coincidence? Or was he finally acknowledging what she had said? Whatever the truth, one thing became clear: the world's obsession with that night wasn't really about the hotel room. It was about what that night represented, the moment when love turned into memory. Demet ended the interview with a quiet smile. We all have that one night, she said, the night where everything could have changed, but instead, it just ended. Her honesty left viewers stunned. For the first time, she wasn't acting, wasn't hiding behind roles or characters. She was simply a woman telling her truth. That night in the hotel wasn't a scandal, it was the final chapter of something millions had watched begin. And perhaps, that's why it hit so deeply. Because everyone, at some point, has stood in that quiet room, wishing for a different ending, knowing it will never come. Now, years later, the silence is finally broken. The mystery, the speculation, the heartbreak, all replaced by something far more powerful: closure. And maybe that's what makes this revelation so shocking. Not because of what happened that night, but because of what didn't. There was no fight, no betrayal, no hidden drama. Just two souls saying goodbye in the most human way possible. As the interview concluded, Demet looked straight into the camera and said one last thing: people think endings are sad. But sometimes, the truth, the real truth, is the most peaceful thing in the world. And just like that, the world that once fed on rumors finally heard her voice. Clear. Honest. Final. That night in the hotel room wasn't about scandal. It was about love, the kind that ends quietly, but never truly disappears.